Títulos en los controles.
Okay, so we're going to begin the interpretation. I will start that now. And then I would like to turn it over to Stacy.
Good evening, everyone.
You have to join it. Okay, perfect.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Stacy Caldwell. I'm the CEO of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, and I wanted to take a moment to welcome you to our Forest Futures Salon featuring the topic around evacuation preparedness. We're excited to have you join us here today and truly appreciate the efforts of our partners who will be featured in today's program. As a small mountain community, we choose this place for a region to live. Beyond its amazing beauty worthy of celebrating and protecting, we choose to live in a small community where we know our neighbors, make eye contact on the trails, help each other out when the power goes out, and give high fives at the end of a good ski run. Now is a time for us to come together, learn together, educate ourselves, our community, and listen on how we can protect ourselves and each other in these really difficult times where we have drought, we have an abundance of forest fuel. We have the opportunity to make a difference as a community and prepare ourselves. And I'm so grateful to each of you for taking the time and being a part of this. We will be recording. We encourage you to share the recording when it's complete. We think this will be an evergreen program throughout our fire season. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our amazing team who have put together a really great program. Allison Schwedner with the Community Collaborative and Nicole Luke-Mueller with our Forest Futures. And thank you so much, both of you, for all your hard work and the rest of our TTCF team for putting together a great program. So with that, take it away, Allison.
Thank you, Stacy. So I'm just going to talk a moment about the work the foundation does, as well as the collaborative, before I turn it over to Nicole. So like Stacy said, the foundation has been serving our community for a while, since 1998. Our main role is to connect people and opportunities, and we generate resources to build a more caring, creative, and effective community. And while attracting philanthropic resources is one of our primary areas of focus, without consistent strategy and leadership, we know that money and resources can be wasted. So we really pride ourselves in connecting donors to the causes that they love, supporting nonprofits through grants and training, and connecting community leaders to collaborate on strategy. This really ensures that our grant making and resources we attract to our region are aligned and effective. So next slide, please. So we are supported by an amazing board of directors, a smart group who are passionate about this region, representatives across different industries who are deeply embedded and engaged in our community. And Hannah Sullivan is on the call tonight, so thank you for joining us. We appreciate all your service. And we also have a number of staff members on the call this evening. So thank you, Nicole, Christina, Sashay, Caroline, and Therese for being with us this evening. We appreciate your support. So a community foundation is a philanthropic organization dedicated to improving the lives and environment of a particular area. They play a key role in identifying and addressing the needs of their region and responding with resources and solutions. And beyond grant making and scholarships, the Community Foundation has identified 3 critical issues unique to our community to focus special attention on. So family strengthening, forest health, and housing. So within each of these initiatives, we have convened a group of stakeholders to work together and tackle these challenges in our community that require more than one agency or more than one grant to solve. This has provided an opportunity to build trusted relationships and capacity. So I'm going to talk quickly about the program I work with, the Community Collaborative. So the Collaborative is a partnership of more than 46 health, education, and social service organizations who work together to improve the lives of our local people. We meet regularly to measure and analyze data that informs our work, and we strategize on how to best work together through collaboration to support the community. And we know that we can't do it alone. Here is a list of our amazing partners that comprise our collaborative. And one of the things that we've been working on in partnership with over 30 organizations, and several of which are on this call this evening, is a Tahoe Truckee blueprint to better prepare and respond to a disaster. This plan is called a COAD, which stands for Communities Active in a Disaster. So COADs focus on preparedness and are ready to respond with resources, volunteers, and coordination of services to those who need assistance during and immediately after disaster, and perhaps into long-term recovery if needed. So the COAD will focus coordination and response efforts in several areas. So public information, volunteer and donation management, shelter and transportation, emergency financial assistance, case management, and emotional and spiritual care. So we're really excited to get the COAD launched and running. We are in the final processes of putting the plan in place and should be good to go in just a couple of weeks from now. So it is this intersection of community safety and forestry that brings us together today for what I know will be an informative and important discussion. As we look to a sustainable future in our region, being prepared for wildfire and evacuation scenarios is critical to ensuring safety of all community members and supporting our emergency services workers in critical situations. So through the nexus of our community collaborative and our Forest Futures initiative, the Community Foundation is poised to play an instrumental role in increasing safety and community resiliency. And as we all know, unfortunately, this past fire season was one of the worst on record, lasting longer than ever before with mega fires surrounding our beautiful Tahoe Truckee community. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Nicole, who is the director of the Forest Futures Initiative, to talk a little bit more about how we're going to spend our next hour and 15 minutes together. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks, Allison. So I think it's safe to say that wildfire is now a year-round threat here in the West and in California, as we've seen many fires have started over the last few months before what used to be considered the start of fire season. And because of that, we should always be prepared for evacuation scenarios, and we'd like to help make our community as prepared as possible. Forest Futures is TTCF's newest initiative. It is our response to climate action and to the immediate threat that our community faces from wildfire in the region. The Forest Futures program focuses on 3 areas of impact. The first impact area is protecting communities, such as reducing fuels, establishing fire breaks, and funding for evacuation route clearing and protection. The second area of impact is building a forest economy through funding for workforce development, infrastructure, and industry to utilize hazardous forest waste. We're aiming to strengthen the economy in our region. And finally, accelerating market solutions. With this impact area, we're hoping to scale and speed forest management while creating a model that can be replicated in other global mountain communities. Forest Futures is deploying flexible and nimble capital to fill gaps in needs, accelerating projects, permits, and progress, and with funds flowing into the community almost as quickly as we can raise them. This is a multi-year $30 million campaign, and we're so proud to have raised $5.4 million to date. We've released $1 million into the community back in April, and we're preparing to release another $855,000 in grants later this month. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speakers, and then we'll hand it over to them to go over our evacuation presentations. First, we have Paul Cummings, who's the Emergency Services Program Manager for Nevada County. Paul is originally from San Diego and landed in the area in 2015 with the Air Force. During his time in the military, he served as an air traffic controller and B-1 bomber weapons systems officer. He's a father of 2 kids and loves the outdoor, and is a member of the Nevada County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team. Bob WOMACK is our second speaker and is the Emergency Services Coordinator for the town of Truckee. Bob has lived and worked in Truckee most of his life. He is a certified emergency manager with extensive experience in alert and warning and evacuations. Prior to his current role as the town of Truckee's emergency manager, he worked for 25 years in law enforcement as a supervisor and incident commander for multiple incidents and special events. Bob is a trainer for incident command systems and a variety of other emergency management roles. Bob is an active in the outdoor space and volunteers for a variety of community groups. Next, we have Sean Scales, and Sean is the lieutenant from the Nevada County Sheriff's Office. Lieutenant Scales has been a peace officer since 2006 and has worked for the Nevada County Sheriff's Office since 2010. During his tenure as a peace officer, he has worked in patrol, investigations, dispatch, corrections, personnel and training, and the Office of Emergency Services. We also have Lieutenant Paul Long joining us from the Placer County Sheriff's Office. And Lieutenant Long has been in emergency services since 1990 as a paramedic, firefighter, and law enforcement officer. He has spent the last 26 years in law enforcement and the last 10 working in Tahoe. He is currently the lieutenant for the Burton Creek Station in Tahoe City. We also have Dave Atkinson on the line to assist with answering questions from the Placer County Office of Emergency Services. Dave is the Assistant Director of the Placer County Office of Emergency Services and joined Placer County in 2005. Prior to transferring to OES, he managed the county's water and wastewater operations group. And over the last 5 years, he also served as the planning coordinator in the county's Emergency Operations Center. So before I hand it over to our guest speakers, I'd just like to remind everyone to please keep yourself muted during the presentations. If you have questions, you can type them into the chat. We will be monitoring the chat. Staff will be monitoring the chat and recording all of the questions down. And then we will address all of the questions after the presentations are finished. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to our speakers.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Allison. On behalf of all the speakers, I just want to say thank you to the foundation for the opportunity to address this group. And I'm also just really excited to see where the COAD goes over the next year or two, and really excited to be part of that. So tonight, what you're going to hear from my office, our partners, Placer County, is we're going to try to paint that picture of, what is the fire threat that we're facing? What are some of the tools that we have to try to mitigate that threat? What are some of the things that we're doing to work together? And then what does that mean to you as an engaged resident? I'm sure that all of you on this call, you're here because you have concerns about that wildfire threat that we face. So, why is fire a threat? It's sort of a rhetorical question, right? We know that, like we've already heard, a combination of factors are driving wildfires that turn into megafires, unfortunately, and they're becoming record-breaking every year. So to start off with, we've talked about fire history or the lack of fire history. If you look at a fire history map of Nevada County, and I'm sure it's the same in Placer County, over the last 150 years, there's actually spots where we really haven't seen any major fires. What that's created is a really high fuel load that if we don't go out and do mechanical clearing or work with residents like yourselves to help us do that clearing, and a fire comes through, it's going to burn hot and fast and be very destructive. It's going to be, the opposite of that healthy fire that the California ecosystem depends on to bring nutrients back into the soil. So that's one factor. Climate change, whether you believe in that or not, is a major factor in driving these fires as well. We know that the increased heating, the prolonged drought, it's having an effect on the health of our forest. Add that to the increased fuel load, and it's again setting us up for these fast-moving wildfires. We're seeing more of the red flag days, and if you're not familiar, I'll just refresh you that a red flag day are those conditions issued by the National Weather Service when we have high temperatures, winds greater than 25 miles an hour, and low humidity. Under those circumstances, we expect to see fires get out of control. Doesn't mean that it can't happen on another day, but those are the days when we're really seeing these wind-driven, again, these mega fires. So, and just a statistic that I think was already alluded to, 7 of the 20 worst fires that the state has seen were in the last 2 years. And so we're going to continue to, unfortunately, see that trend because of the factors I've mentioned. We know that there's more people who are moving into that wildland urban interface. So there's more people nested into the forest, which creates more of a threat to people and property and structures as they become woven into the forest. We also know that that creates more opportunities for ignition in the forest, right? So we have to work together to try to reduce that. I want to end, I'm going to transition it off to our other speakers, but I wanted to end by just pointing out that we do have really strong collaboration around this topic of wildfire. We have strong collaboration on the side of mitigation, where we're working with nonprofits, like some of the nonprofits on the call tonight, and working with state and federal agencies, and then just inter-county partnerships to do things to prepare the community and reduce the fuel load. But this is an evacuation focused presentation, right? So during an evacuation, these events can quickly overcome, whether it be the town or the county, or these fires or events can cross county lines and become regional disasters. So you'll see a theme today as we're talking, that we're very dependent on each other as we quickly exceed our local thresholds. That may look like bringing in law enforcement from Placer County to support Nevada County during a fast moving fire. That may look like bringing in staff to shelter individuals. That may look like displaced residents from Nevada County going to Placer County, and Placer being a good neighbor and taking them in and sheltering them as evacuees. So you'll hear those threads and themes today as we continue on. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Robert WOMACK, who's the Town of Truckee Police Department Emergency Manager, and he'll talk about some of the tools that we're using during evacuations to inform residents and expedite the evacuation.
Thank you, Paul. And I want to echo that we are a collaborative effort. Very much the concept of one team, one fight. Really, you probably, for the most part, on a day of event, won't know who is actually behind the scenes doing what work, because it will look the same, whether it's coming from the town, the county, whether it's coming from Placer. There are different platforms, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. But when we talk about how we're going to notify, how we're going to do evacuations, the process itself is a statewide standard now. So it shouldn't look totally different from one jurisdiction to the other, outside of maybe the mechanism of how that notification is accomplished. Next slide. So one of the things that we have done with the town this year is that we switched to Code Red from Nixle. We continue to push that message out. We are now messaging solely on Code Red. This was important for us because it started that redundancy within our county. As things move forward, we're not sure where the state will land totally, and we may have a system that is statewide, but at this point that doesn't exist. So we do have a different system from Placer County, and I'm sure Lieutenant Long will talk about that shortly. But for Nevada County, the platform across the whole county is Code Red. It really allows for targeted alerts to the address level, something we were missing prior with Nixle. We might have been in a situation based upon how that alerting system works, where most of the town was going to receive a message and potentially be evacuating at the same time, when we only wanted a small portion or a targeted population to leave. It also allows for some additional platforms. One of the things that we talk about often here is, what are we going to do in the event of a public safety outage management event where NV Energy turns off the power to Truckee Donner Public Utility District, and how are we going to get a message out when things like cellular systems and cable internet start to fail? And so one of the ways we'll be able to do that is through using the National Weather Service radio system, and we're able to do notifications to that system going forward that we weren't able to do before. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we switched to Code Red. The system is used to send critical communications. Could be evacuation notices, missing child alerts, hazardous materials incidents. It could be a variety of really high-level emergencies. We also use it locally to send messages like the charcoal ban that is in effect, to highlight days when there's red flag warnings, to highlight days when there are differing events like smoke in the air from fires that are around us but not threatening us. And those often will come from Truckee Fire, who is also on Code Red with us. And so we use that more as a community notification system, with the idea being that we're going to get people familiar to it. So we continue to use it. If you're not seeing messages after you signed up, then it would be a good time to get a hold of either myself or go to one of our websites. And that would also help us make sure that we're getting people signed up. Both the county website and the town website have Code Red landing pages. And Paul mentioned that Code Red does also deliver in both English and Spanish. We work hard to get messages out both ways. It is under time pressure. Trying to do that is sometimes difficult, but that is a major goal. And certainly as we go forward, when we start using the wireless alerts and we do cell phone notifications, which Code Red has the ability to do, that will be a time when even those become even more important and more difficult because they're not as easy to translate. But we do work hard to get that out there. As far as making sure you have the right caller ID in Code Red, this is the same for every notification platform. But often what we hear from people, and I'm certainly guilty of this, is I carry an iPhone, I have my favorites, that's the only thing that's going to get through at night. You need to have these numbers so that you can hear them at night. Because if you have your phone on Do Not Disturb or even turn it off, on those nights when we're trying to get a hold of you, you've really limited our way of getting a hold of you. That's true for all the notification platforms. So think about making sure to put in those numbers, the emergency notification number and the general notification number. Obviously, we want everybody to try and sign up. I mean, that's our biggest push. I continue to talk to people who are aware that we've made the change and they just haven't gotten around to putting themselves on Code Red. That's a big thing to do. Get yourself onto Code Red. Next slide. When you sign up, if you go to the managed account rather than the guest, which we certainly recommend, because then you can figure out what level of alert you want. On the bottom there, it has or create an account highlighted in red. What we've found is that the social media apps change so often that sometimes the links end up breaking to try and log in that way. Much better off to try and just use the create an account, which is simply you put in a username and a password versus trying to use your Google or Facebook account to log in. Just seems to be, from what we're seeing, easier to create an account than try and do it the other way. Next slide. So pivoting a little bit, we're doing the notifications across our county. We have also used the Zone Haven system for creating zones. These are evacuation zones. They allow us to do a couple of different things. First off, they're using artificial intelligence at the computer level. So they were optimized in terms of size throughout the county and to make evacuations a little easier. The other thing that they do is they allow us to shorten messages. We do still have some severe character limits depending on the platform we're using. It has nothing to do with Code Red. It has everything to do with our cell phones and the age of some of our cell phones. There are plenty out there that can accept larger messages that are more targeted. However, there are still plenty of old phones. I actually saw somebody walking around the other day with a flip phone, and I had to look twice because I couldn't believe I was looking at a flip phone, but I was. They still exist, and so we have to be able to alert those also. Those have a much smaller character limit. And so what we've done across the county is we've broken everything up into zones. Zones for the town are fairly specific to the town boundaries, and they start with TRK for Truckee, TRK dash, and then it's a 4-digit as to whatever the zone number itself is. We will use the zone number at the same time. We will use a description if we have the room in the message. The county has the same ability. We have the ability to message off of either one. So again, you may not necessarily see or know who is actually typing the message, but we will make sure that we tell you who the message is coming from, even if it's being put out there by another agency. One other thing is, if you have not already gone and figured out where your zone is or what zone you're in, you can go to the community.zonehaven.com address. And in that upper left corner, if you type your address in there, it will take you to your zone so that you'll know exactly where it is. We have magnets. If you haven't gotten those, we hand them out at a lot of events in town where you can write your zone. We recommend other places that I've seen it done on garbage cans, on the whiteboard next to the door, all those places where you can find them in a hurry when you need it. Next slide. So as I mentioned, if you're going to find your zone, go to community.zonehaven.com. Enter your address in the upper left in the pop-up window. I will say one of the things we've found is we've worked through a lot of these platforms. I have pop-up blocker turned on my computer, which means when I type in that address, I don't get to see it the same way it says on here because I've blocked pop-ups. We have found this to be true with a lot of different platforms. Is the platform works fine, but it doesn't work with the way everybody has their computer tuned. So if you have your pop-up blocker on, it won't take you to that zone, or excuse me, it won't pop it up. It will take you to that zone though. Next slide. So I'm actually going to skip the tying it all together because Lieutenant Scales with Nevada County Sheriff's Department is going to explain how we actually go from the point where a call is received all the way through to how evacuations and different things occur in an event. So turn it over to Lieutenant Scales.
Thanks, Bob. First off, I can't express how lucky you are to have Bob on that side of the hill. He's a great ally to us here on those of us who cover both sides, and just a good friend and a good partner for many, many years. So let's talk about how we get alerts, or how we get to alerts and evacuations. So first thing we will receive is usually through our dispatch, a 911 phone call, or it could also come from one of our fire partners letting us know that there's a fire in a certain area. At that point, what we'll do is we will have anybody who's on duty in that jurisdiction will respond to that particular area and look for the fire personnel who are in charge of the incident. At that point, we set up unified command if it's necessary. I say if it's necessary because if there's a fire that's small and no evacuations are needed and no further action is needed from law enforcement, we go back to our regular duties. In the event it is necessary, we will link up with fire personnel and get together a plan of action. That information comes from a variety of sources. Fire personnel have airplanes in the sky, personnel on the ground. They're doing surveys of the area, all those kinds of things. Take into account weather information, population of the area, topography, you name it. And then they'll get together and decide whether evacuations need to take place and where those evacuations need to take place. At that point, it kind of sort of branches a little bit. So if it's a small event and the patrol sergeant can handle it themselves, they will start alerting people via code red, and also other responding deputies and police officers will start doing door-to-door notifications in the affected area. For the alert portion, when you looked at the zones, what we will do first is we will toggle those zones to whatever the order is. In Nevada County, our messaging has been pretty consistently, we will give two types of notifications. One will be for a warning, and the other will be for an order. So the difference between those two, a warning is there's something in the area that could hurt you, be it a fire or whatever it is, and there's usually direction given, evacuate immediately, shelter in place, those types of things. But with a warning, if you require extra time, let's say you've got a lot of pets, or you've got to wrangle a lot of kids, or if you've got a few bumps and bruises and scrapes that makes you move slow like I do and take a little bit longer to get going, then you really want to get moving at that time. Generally, the message will be something along the lines of, this is an alert from the Nevada County Sheriff's Office. There's a fire effect in the area of blank. And if you require extra time to get your belongings together, go ahead and do so now. And then it directs you to usually community.zonehaven.com. If it's an order, that means leave immediately. An order is not something you want to play around with. Frankly, I wouldn't play around with a warning either. If I were in a warning area, I would probably just leave, depending upon the event. The way the zones were designed, we took into account information from fire personnel, law enforcement, everybody who had everybody who was a stakeholder in it, and designed the zones to be the most effective for evacuation, and also not over alerting, but not under alerting as well. So once we send out those, we toggle those zones and change it in Zone Haven, an alert is not sent until we actually send one through Code Red, as the platform we use in Nevada County. So with Code Red, we have the ability to send text message, email, TDD, and traditional phone calls as well. Bob talked to you about how to register for Code Red and the types of accounts you can do with Code Red. It's a very useful tool for us to notify as many people almost instantaneously, but it only works if people are registered for their particular zones and registered in Code Red. So the other types of alerts we can do are what are called WEAs, wireless emergency alerts, which those are the messages and alerts you get on your cell phone when you drive into an affected area. An important thing on WEAs is that the location information on your phone is what determines whether you will receive the message or not. I know a lot of people will turn their location off. Sometimes you're like me and just want to preserve your battery. However, what that does is turns your smartphone into a dumb phone. So your phone no longer knows where you are, so you could receive a message that does not pertain to your area whatsoever. The other types of alerts we can send with the Code Red system, besides WEAs and the traditional Code Red message, are what is the emergency alert system. And that's when you hear a message that has a certain tone, and then it can take over radio waves, television, those types of things. Whether you receive the message on what television system you use will be dependent upon who you subscribe to. Some of the streaming services don't have a designation to identify them as local, so you may not receive them if you're going through one of those services. In the field, the response is, just like you've heard Bob and Paul talk about, is it's very much a team effort. So at any one time in Nevada County, the Sheriff's Office on patrol will have a sergeant and 5 deputies on. Truckee PD usually has a sergeant and 4. So can we possibly handle a large scale evacuation with those people? No, we can't. Luckily, we have great partners in Placer County. There's been many fires I've worked where Placer County hasn't even waited to send us help. They know we need it and they send them right away. They are one of the best partners you can have. On the west side of the county, we have Yuba County. They're a fantastic partner as well. And in addition, we have our own personnel that we can call in to assist. From there, we'll receive 911 calls that may prompt extra calls for service for us, such as lift assists or people need extra assistance evacuating, and we'll take care of those as they come in addition to knocking on doors in the evacuation area and making sure everybody has received that message. One of the most important things you can do is we have evacuation tags at most of the local fire stations, and you can pick one up. Those evacuation tags are there to let us know that you are not at your address anymore and we don't need to come knocking on your door. Some of the driveways in Nevada County can be extremely long, and sometimes there's gates and things like that that block us from going up them. So it's very important that if you leave your house during an evacuation, please place that tag someplace very visible close to your driveway that lets us know that you're not there anymore. It saves us a bit of time in a stressful situation. Other than that, the response from Placer County, as I'm sure Lieutenant Long will tell you, will basically echo those same principles of unified command with fire, getting together, deciding what areas need to be evacuated, and then taking action. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, I think Lieutenant Long, you're up.
That throws it to me. So thank you for the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation and Forest Futures for inviting me to this talk. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your work. So to start with, we can actually move to the next one. I think there's been enough discussion of overall alerting systems. Ours is Placer Alert. You can see the website there is placer-alert.org. I saw a question come through, and I know we're not handling questions now, but this is important. For those of you who live on a county line, if you, for example, sign up for Placer Alert, Code Red doesn't translate into our Everbridge system or a Placer Alert system and vice versa. And so if you live on the county line and you need notifications from more than one system, or want notifications from more than one system, you'll have to sign up in those systems. That often requires an address inside the jurisdictional county. And so just food for thought. So some of our people who live in Sierra Meadows, Truckee Fire actually services them. We're their law enforcement area, or we're their law enforcement entity. And so that might be a good example of someone who wants to sign up for both. Go ahead to the next slide. So the 5 things I ask of everyone: prepare in advance, prepare your home and family. That really is something you'll learn more about from fire departments than from law enforcement, but there is some excellent websites on there for readyforwildfire.org, which also has Spanish language pages and worksheets available. I need you to know 2 routes to the main road. All our communities share something in common, certainly the ones around the lake. They have, every community ends in a state highway where the decision is to turn right or left. And given that, our job is to tell you whether you're going right or left. Your job is to know at least 2 routes to that state highway and know them well enough that you can drive it in the dark and in the smoke without a lot of landmarks being visible, assuming the power will be out under worst case scenarios. This also means you want to practice those routes in advance. Next slide. We've discussed red flag weather. I think that's been handled very well. I have very little more to say except this. Because the catastrophic fires occur during red flag weather, the 2 most important things are, for example, to be extra prepared during the red flag weather. Make sure your car is filled with fuel. If you turn your cell phone off at night, don't do that during red flag weather, knowing that's when these catastrophic fires occur, knowing that's when you want to receive those notifications. Make sure that you do leave your phones on and be ready to go. Also be ready to go under circumstances where there is no power. For example, if you have a garage door and you keep your car inside a garage, you need to know how to open that door without power. You cannot assume that there will be power during a major fire. And the last thing is, and this applies a lot to folks in the lake, where somewhere around 2/3 of our homes are second homes. During red flag weather, it's a good idea to consider just leaving the basin. If you have a second home that's someplace else, then that is where you want to be during red flag weather to avoid the stress of potential evacuation and also help to keep the roads clear for your neighbors. Next slide, please. I think Lieutenant Scales covered this very adequately. Nothing more to say about that. So, but the advantage is, if you hear it from everyone, you've kind of assumed it's equally important to all of us. So something to take note of. Next slide, please. If you're interacting with the fire, and by that I mean you are receiving embers, or you are getting heavy smoke, or you can hear the fire, don't wait for an evacuation order. You are in immediate life-threatening position. Leave immediately. Even more than an evacuation order, that's a situation to grab the living things inside your home and leave with those living things. Preserve your life. Next slide, please. High-low sirens. In addition to all the notifications discussed by all the other speakers, we also, and I believe the other counties also, use high-low sirens as a means of an evacuation. This is a European-style siren that we don't normally use in law enforcement, but we will use it as a communications means. And so I will share my screen for a minute and play a short video clip for that, of that. I believe I will. So as I say in Placer County, that high-low means time to go. Hearing that siren is the equivalent of an immediate evacuation order. And so that is a warning that you're in grave and imminent danger, and it is a lawful order to leave your home and activate your emergency plan, activate your evacuation plan. Other counties may have different meanings to that siren, so it's important you check with your local jurisdiction to make sure you're understanding the message they're sending. And with that, I have nothing further, and I think we are open to questions.
Thanks so much, Lieutenant Long. I believe Paul Cummings actually wanted to jump back in and add a couple more points before we open it up to questions, so I'm going to let him do that.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. I just had a couple great points that I think you heard from our speakers tonight that I wanted to reiterate, put a bow on before we got into questions. One thing I wanted to start off by pointing out was a point that we heard from the campfire was at an individual and a community level, we need to be ready to communicate like it's 1950. So what does that mean? That means your cell phone may not work. For the example of Butte County during the campfire, their emergency operations center, which is pretty well connected, they didn't have internet, they didn't have phone lines, they in places didn't have power, and all they had was their cell phone, and it was pretty spotty. So cell phones and radios. So how can you create redundant systems? And so to put all together, you know, what we heard already from both counties, Placer and Nevada counties, we try to create a series of safety nets in the hopes that you don't fall through those nets when it's time to message you, right? So we tell the public to tune into the radio. So in your area, it would be KTKE. If there's other AM or FM radio stations that are pushing emergency information, know those stations and tune into them. Be signed up for Code Red in Nevada County, because we'll send you a text message, a phone call, and an email. Make sure you're keeping communications going with your neighbors, because you may not hear about this fire from anybody else but a neighbor who either calls you or knocks on your door. So try to create a local network to stay informed. And then lastly, if all of those systems fail, you don't get a code red, your friends and family don't call you, and you're not hearing anything on the radio, hopefully what you do hear is what we heard Lieutenant Long playing in his video, that high-low siren. That's an area alerting system that's going to tell you if you're close enough to hear that, that means that you, your family, your home, your life is in an immediate threat. And in Nevada County, it means the same thing as in Placer County, that you're under an evacuation order. So if you hear that, you need to get your family and you need to get out. A couple of the things I wanted to point out that I don't think we touched on were we need to consider our pets. Animal evacuation is a major consideration. Have a plan to evacuate and house whether you have livestock or livestock and pets. We learned this in some of the local fires we've had in the state. We learned this in the hurricanes that we've seen across the country, that people won't leave without their pets. So have a plan to get your pet and to make them safe, and then to get that pet somewhere. In Nevada County, we usually open up our fairgrounds and we have volunteers working with our local law enforcement to make sure that the animals are taken care of. So have a plan for your animals, because we know how important they are too. Have a plan for yourself, that as you're evacuating, that you either have 2 or 3 friends that you're ready to go stay with, or a hotel plan. The plan is not going to be to go stay in the local hotel in your county, because it's probably going to become quickly overwhelmed. Make sure that you have everything you need to go be an evacuee for anywhere from 3 days to, in the case of the campfire, if your home's destroyed, it could be weeks or months, right? So make sure you have the important papers, your medication, everything that you and your family need to be self-sufficient and sustained for an extended period of time if necessary. Also, we have to remember to check in on our neighbors who have disabilities, our neighbors that are older adults, right? Our AFN folks. Unfortunately, the statistics tell us that in these fast-moving wildfires where there's people who unfortunately succumb, 80% of the folks are over 50 who succumb to these fires. So we really need to make sure that we check on our neighbors. If you have the ability, knock on their door, see if you can offer them a ride. People without transportation, unfortunately, suffer and perish in these fires. So work as a community to try to create transportation plans to support your neighbors during these fast-moving fires, because law enforcement and fire officials are going to do everything they can to get into your community to help you, but unfortunately, there's just not enough of them. I think we heard that from both law enforcement agencies today, that the ratio of vehicles and officers to the public is going to be very low in the beginning, and they're going to be surging resources into the area. But for a fast-moving fire, they're not going to be able to go knock on every single door or go transport every single person who needs that help. So we have to work as a community to help them. It's not that law enforcement and fire don't want to be there. They just don't have the ability to be there for some of these big, large area fires. So we have to try to help each other. The last thing I wanted to touch on was repopulation. So once you're evacuated and you're out, you're staying in a hotel, or you're with your friends, your pets, your family, you're all safe. Be patient, stay tuned, trust in the local law enforcement that they're going to protect your neighborhood if it hasn't succumbed to fire, that they're going to be saturating that area. We get a lot of concerns about looters, that they are going to be in there with a very high ratio now of law enforcement to the amount of homes, to make sure that there's nobody in there that shouldn't be in there. A lot of people have concerns about the evacuation tags, that it's going to be alerting looters to the fact that you're out. All the looters know that everybody is out from that area because there was a fast-moving fire that came through there, right? And so that's why law enforcement will be there in force. In neighborhoods where they would have only had one deputy in one vehicle, they're going to probably have 10 or 15. They're going to have a high ratio there to provide security. That's a major mission of the sheriff's office. Another thing the sheriff's office is going to do is they're going to work as hard as they can to make those areas safe, working in unified command with the fire personnel and try to get you back as quickly as possible. Just be patient for that process. You have to consider that the fire may still be going and it could kick back up again, and it could be a hazard to you to bring you back. There could be trees and power lines that are down, other hazards outside of the fire. You may not be able to get back into your home and have running water or electricity, so it's not safe for you. Your home may have been damaged. So they have to go through and take all those things into consideration as they make that safe to repopulate. So just please be patient as you work through that process. That's all I have, Nicole. I think we're open to questions now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. And thank you to all of our speakers. So we did get a couple questions in during the chat. Some of them were answered in the chat and some of them were not. So I'm going to go through the ones from the chat and some that I came up with myself. And one question specifically addressed El Dorado County. And I know none of you are specifically with El Dorado County, but given that some of our community members on the West Shore, Tahoma, Meeks Bay, cross into El Dorado County, can anyone touch on the coordination with El Dorado County? And do any of you possibly know if El Dorado County uses Code Red or a different system? If you're able to answer those questions, any of you.
I actually can take a swipe at it. I actually looked at their website when that question came out, and it does look like they also use Code Red. But I would reiterate that if you sign up for Code Red in one county, that's not the same as signing up for Code Red in other counties as well. And so the best thing to do is go to their website, look at their emergency notifications. You look at El Dorado County Sheriff's Office emergency notifications. It takes you directly to the page that has the sign up links on it.
Great, thank you, Lieutenant Long. Let's see, another question. What about people, how should people handle the situation if, say, they work in Truckee, but their home is in Tahoe City or school or kids or, you know, whatever, the division of, and what if like one area is evacuated, but you want to, like, say your home's evacuated, but you're not home? Can you go home to get your things or your pets, like especially with pets being at home, or is the advisement to just stay away if your home's been evacuated?
So I think both of us are going to answer it, but I'll go for it and then I'll let Lieutenant Scales. So what we have found in studies is people do return, but that right there doubles the number of vehicles we're trying to get out. So if you look at it from that perspective, that's why we don't allow it to happen if we can avoid it. And particularly for Truckee, there was some questions about, you know, how are we going to use both exits and things like that from our subdivisions? And the answer is we're not going to let people back in. Once we evacuate an area on an order, we keep people out as best we can because we don't want them in there. So don't plan for the ability to go back. This is something that Paul mentioned, you know, about pets, about kids. You know, maybe your kids are old enough to stay at home alone, but they're not old enough to drive. What is your plan for those kids when an evacuation happens? What is your plan for your pets and your dogs? And where are we going to go with them? I'm looking at the last question because I know that there's a lot of concern about I-80 and backups. And I have a great slide that I use that's not up there today because it wasn't really what we were directing it at. But the reason we see backups in the winter and the reason we see backups in the summer is because we take lanes out, either for snow clearing, we put a chain truck in the way, whatever it happens to be. One of the things that we have done for the summer particularly is we will pull those constructions, Caltrans will pull those construction barriers out and open the road up completely. That's why you see how they're set up so that they can actually go back to non-controlled road access. So we're going from smaller roads to bigger roads to roads that can carry that are limited access and carry more people. That's the idea behind how we have our evacuations set up so that we actually have the ability to carry plenty of traffic on I-80 going out of town in either direction. Just depends on where our fires are.
I would also throw in that you're probably safer on a main evacuation route than you would be on a private road or near home for a fast moving fire. I know we don't have any fire personnel on the call to second that, but I personally would rather be on the highway than on a private road.
Yeah, I think there were some follow-up questions that came in as you guys were addressing that one about backup on 89, 267, how, and I guess knowing that we have traffic backups just from influx of people being here in, high seasons, what is there a plan to mitigate, what is the plan to mitigate on 267 or 89? And then also somebody asked how they know which direction to go on 89. I would assume that would just be part of the evacuation order, would tell you where to go. Is that correct?
So regarding direction, generally what you'll get from us would be, there's a fire in this particular area. So you're going to, we will let you know where the fire is, but we're not going to tell you which way to go. We're not going to say, okay, go to 267 and then head this direction. We're going to tell you where the fire is located. And then you guys know you're the experts in your own area. Your house is your beat. You know the area much better than I'm sure a lot of people who would be responding to that particular area because you drive it every day. So that's where it's incumbent upon you, like Lieutenant Long was saying, to know multiple routes out. For those of you that only have one way out, that's why it's important to leave early. There's no possible scenario where I can guarantee that absolutely everybody is going to be able to get out. For every type of evacuation plan you can have, there is something to break that plan. The best thing to do is be prepared for absolutely everything you can and leave early.
I want to respond to something I just saw on here, and actually I'm going to thank Paul for the notes that he gave me from the professor that was discussing this particular incident. But please do not try and outrun a fire, out-hike a fire through the woods. Don't think you can hide in water. It just doesn't work that way. You have to have faith in the fact that we have put together plans for you, that we realize that the roads are going to be congested. I would also say that do not rely on waiting for the high-low siren, because we may not be able to do that. We may be doing traffic control and not in the neighborhoods driving around trying to use a high-low siren. We'd like to think we're going to have that staffing. We'd like to think we're going to have that time.
Hey, this is Steve Sawyer. Hey, I think I've emailed you a couple of times, maybe texted as well. We've gone a couple of years here with your trying to have you repaint our cabin at Bucks Lake, and obviously the fires have.
I don't know that that was actually directed towards us. Just make sure that you understand that the best place you can actually be is in a vehicle moving on main roads. We've kind of touched on that. And so the idea that you want to try other things, somebody mentioned dirt roads, realize that most locals think they know the best way out, and nobody has a lock on knowing those secret routes. As we've all learned, when traffic backs up, there's no secret route. You're better off getting to the main road and letting us push through. Yes, that was one of the things I saw in the chat that, talked about Highway 50. And, that certainly was a little bit of an eye opener in terms of people not having fuel and breaking down. So that's an important thing to consider.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to address a couple of other questions that are straying away from the roads. I know there's a lot more questions around that, but I want to get to some of these other ones. And one of them is, what happens if there's an evacuation when schools are in session and a school is in an area of evacuation? Is there evacuation plans to get kids out of schools? And then does that also involve reunification plans with kids and parents?
happy to take it unless Paul wants it.
Doesn't
So-
matter. I can tell you certainly from our perspective, yes, there are. Among other things, for example, North Tahoe High School and Middle School is a large cement building surrounded by large parking lots and irrigated fields. If there's a fast moving fire in the area, rather than try to evacuate 1,200 students, we will most likely have them shelter in place and then do reunification when the immediate threat is gone. But there's no way to call that play in advance. It always depends on the fuels, the fire, the winds, and the overall situation. But yes, there are existing plans for evacuation, sheltering in place, and reunification.
Thanks. This question regards public transportation. Is public transportation involved in evacuation plans? Neighbors that don't have their own mode of transportation, that sort of thing. Does public transportation engage with trying to help get those people out?
It is certainly a part of our plan. Unfortunately, the amount of public transportation we have in the Truckee Basin, and I don't think it's a whole lot different in the North Lake Tahoe area, is not that good, and will certainly be overwhelmed. Part of it being that a bus that goes to a temporary collection point or temporary evacuation point may not be able to return just because of traffic. So what we're looking at is we will look to the county to help us get more buses here. It will just take some time.
The other thing to note is a lot of areas, you can't get a bus in there. So you really have to think about that. So what generally happens, the plan would be to escort those people to an area where buses can either pick them up or get them to a temporary evacuation point, and then they could make their way from there, call family, do whatever we needed to do to get them where they needed to be. But, we have a plan that outlines how many buses and things like that we have that are available. We've got all different sizes and specialty transport options for those with AFN needs. But the biggest factor, at least in a lot of Nevada County, is access on small roads.
And the biggest thing residents can do is have a strong transportation plan. I know that everybody doesn't though. So I try to encourage people, there's those people that live alone, they don't have transportation options, have these concentric rings that go out. So first you might try to have a plan where a family member comes and gets you, or a friend. If that family member or friend can't come and get you, do you have another service that you can use, like a routine taxi or Uber or bus service that's going to try to get you out if you have access to that? If none of those are options for you, call in Nevada County 211. You can tell them if you're under an evacuation warning, this is my address, I need transportation, there's a fire that's near me and I need help to get out. If you feel threatened though by the fire, and especially if you're under an evacuation order, dial 911 and tell them, I'm under an evacuation order, I'm alone, I don't have transportation, and I need to get out. And then they'll work that transportation need through the incident command system and find a way to help you get out. Mute.
Sorry, I was muted. Is it recommended to leave one side of the lake by boat? Like, for example, if North Lake's in an evacuation order, could you hop in your boat, go to South Lake? Would that be an effective option?
I was just typing away on that. So save me some finger strength here. The answer is absolutely not. Remember that the catastrophic fires occur during red flag weather. That always means greater than 25, usually greater than 35 mile an hour by winds. High wind advisory on the lake will always go with red flag weather. So the lake will be very choppy and unsafe and will require boating skills. You'll also have to get to some way to get out there, and no one will be able to come help you because we're going to be busy doing the evacuation. So very much advise against it. And Nicole, I just want to build to something because I saw a whole lot of questions on there about the basin. And going back to the route of travel thing. Two things to remember. One, it is unimaginable the circumstances, slow down for the translator, that would require that we evacuate the entire 72-mile circuit of the lake. It is unimaginable. We will evacuate you, not necessarily even out of the basin, but to a position of safety vis-a-vis the fire. And so, yes, the roads will be congested. We know that. CHP has been a great partner before, and they will be again. If necessary, we can turn 89 or 28 into a giant 2-lane road once we have sufficient personnel available to control those intersections. But that's an undesirable outcome or an undesirable strategy to use, because that means emergency vehicles can't come in that way. And so we would only do that as a last resort. So a general answer to a lot of those questions.
Thank you. There's a question that came up about Serene Lakes, and I think this applies to other communities that only have one access road. How do you guys plan for evacuation of a community with only one road out if that road were to be blocked by fire?
So I think Serene Lakes is mostly ours. I'll hack at that. And the same problem in, for example, in Alpine Meadows or in, Olympic Valley. So the first thing is, I would much rather concentrate on keeping one road open than trying to keep multiple roads open out. So remember, if you looked at those horrible videos from the campfire, the highways were terrifying. There was fire on both sides of the road. But the point is, the people who were taking those videos were successfully driving on those roads and survived that fire. So just because a road is burning on both sides does not equal blocked. We will do our best to keep those roads open and communicate with you. The other options include things like sheltering in place, or perhaps instructing you to move to a particular area. In Serene Lakes, the large parking lots of ski areas occur to me, where we may try to get fire equipment and personnel in there to help defend you and give you a chance to be in that area. Now, having said that, that is never an alternative to evacuating. It's always important that you evacuate and not simply go to a large parking lot and say, hey, I'm beating the system. We can never guarantee your safety, but you're at more risk the closer you stay to the fire.
Thank you. This question was somewhat addressed in the chat, but I think it would be good to address it verbally as well. Recommendations for HOAs and homeowners that are doing short-term rentals to make sure that if there's renters from out of town in the event of an evacuation, that they know what to do and get information as well.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I typed in the chat, but the town requires, along with the with Truckee Fire, that all short-term rentals have posted the evacuation routes, the zone that the facility is in, and how they can expect to receive notifications and how they can sign up. We encourage the owners to make sure that they're telling renters during these seasons the different ways that they might be able to receive emergency messaging. And this kind of goes back to what Paul mentioned. And I would say, I don't expect anybody to go through their whole neighborhood and evacuate everybody. But if you walk out of your front door and there's 3 or 4 houses that you can go knock on doors real quick and tell those people that they need to leave, hopefully that will really help move people and motivate them to leave, because somebody's telling them why they need to go.
Thank you. Couple more questions before we'll wrap up. One is, what is the best checklist to use for evacuation or for evacuation preparation?
There's many of them out there. We have them on our redinvadacounty.org dashboard. I'm sure Placer County has something similar. There's a lot of good resources out there as well online. And a lot of times it's people specific. If you have livestock, it's going to be different for somebody who has pets, dogs and cats or things like that, or somebody who lives alone. So what you really need to do is look at where you live, look at what you need to leave, as in, do you need your prescription medications? Do you need to gather your kids, your pets, your livestock? all of those things. A lot of that is driven by the person who is evacuating. And then of course, if you live in one of those one-way out communities, you're obviously going to want to get out as fast as you can versus somebody who's got multiple ways out, is close to a Interstate 80. So a lot of it is person specific.
Thank you.
And Nicole, I just dovetail on that to say one thing. The lists are all 99% the same, no matter who you see. The most important thing is not to get drawn into the details, but just to start preparing. Pick the first list you have and start preparing with it. That's from a reliable source.
Thank you. Let's see. There was another one. Oh, about test alerts for Code Red and Nixle. Does Code Red or Nixle do test alerts? Like, how can you be sure that they're working properly for you once you've signed up?
I can take that one for Nevada County, at least. That's a great question. In Nevada County, we were historically doing those tests in August. We would send that message out actually throughout the day and hit certain areas to test Code Red for folks. We would do that in August, but we've decided that because August is a fire season, and August is one of the worst months for fire, we don't want people to think it's just a test when we're actually messaging them for a fire. So we've now shifted that annual test to December. So when we do that countywide test, we'll be doing public messaging ahead of it on social media, the newspaper, radio, things like that, encouraging people to sign up for Code Red and letting them know that the test is coming, and then we'll test it in August. So that's what we have for Nevada County. I think Dave's got his hand up to talk about Placer.
So for Placer County, we do something similar. We'll actually be having our next Placer Alert / Everbridge test on August 25th. We're doing that in partnership. So Placer County is actually in a partnership with Sacramento and Yolo counties. So we picked that date because they have an exercise that's happening. So if you're signed up for Placer Alert, please expect to get a test message on August 25th. And there'll be some more outreach coming out real soon about that and what we'd like you to do in anticipation of that.
Thank you, Dave.
Nicole, I would just say for the town and for Truckee Fire, we're going into that season, July 4th. We do a lot more community messaging. So if you get to July 4th and you have not seen a message, I would say you're not signed up correctly because, and it seems like it's a long ways off, but I looked at the calendar and realized it's like 2 weeks when we'll start messaging. So there will be more messaging, community messaging level stuff in the town and really the eastern Nevada County in the next couple of weeks.
Thank you. Yeah, I know I've gotten even just red flag warning notifications and that sort of thing. So hopefully there'll be lots of opportunities for testing before the real need is there. I think that covers most of our questions. So I'm going to wrap it up. If folks have questions remaining that didn't get answered, feel free to email them to me if you would like. We'll be sending and I can get them to our speakers, or you can reach out directly to the agencies. Would be the most direct way to get those questions answered. But we just want to thank everyone for joining, and especially all of our speakers, Paul, Bob, Sean, Dave, and Paul, for keeping us informed and prepared on this very important topic. Hopefully we will not have to use this knowledge for evacuation this year, but we hope this webinar brings you more peace and preparedness in the event that we do. Thank you to Allison and Stacy and the rest of the TTCF staff for bringing this event together. We do have a feedback survey that we'll be sending out in an email with a recording of this, and we'll have the recording in both Spanish and English available. So if you were registered for this event, you'll automatically receive those recordings, and they will also be available through the TTCF website and through our YouTube channel. So feel free to share the recording with anyone that you'd like. Caroline just put the link to our feedback form in the chat as well. And so thank you everyone so much again for joining us, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.